Hello, everyone out there, and thank you for stopping by. Well, today is Veterans Day. I never did serve in the military. However, I have a lot of admiration for those who did. Many of my friends and relatives served. My father was a Vietnam era vet. He missed going to Vietnam by one name. He's pointed out on a number of occasions. My uncle, his younger brother, did go to Vietnam and experienced combat there. What I want to talk about today, though, is hearing about the Second World War from my maternal grandfather. Now, I was born in 1968, which makes me a Gen Xer. And I find that a lot of people my age, people born in the 60s and 70s, had World War II generation grandparents. And I think it's kind of a common experience that we heard about the war from our grandparents firsthand. My grandfather was born in rural Ohio in 1921 in Adams County, which is kind of the western fringe of Appalachia in southern Ohio. And he had a lot of stories about growing up in the Depression, how poor it was. I used to ask him, did you really notice what the depression, what was the Depression like? And he said, well, everybody was just so poor, particularly where we were. You didn't really notice that much change because it was just so bad for everybody. So what he did was when he was 19 years old in 1940, like a lot of people did, he left that environment and he moved to Cincinnati where he took a factory job. And he was doing that for about 2 years. And then what happened? Well, Pearl Harbor happened in December of 1941. And like so many men at that time, he stopped everything. He said, hey, we have been attacked. It's time to go to war. And within a couple of weeks, he had enlisted in the U.S. Navy. And he was in the Navy for the duration. He was overseas most of the time. In 1945, they did bring him back stateside to train others. But most of his duties he was on U.S. Navy ships that escorted merchant marine vessels in the Lend-Lease program. So he was most of the time he was in convoys taking war material over to our allies in Europe. He spent a lot of time in the UK. He had a tremendous amount of admiration for the way the British bore up under the constant attacks that they had, and he was in Plymouth. Yeah, he was instrumental in making me an Anglophile, for my whole life. He also spent, somewhat atypically, almost a year in the Soviet Union, Arkhangelsk, involved again with the Lend-Lease program. He did not enjoy his time in the Soviet Union so much. I'll maybe talk about that in another video. He had a lot of stories to tell about the combat side of it, being attacked by the Messerschmitts. In these situations, he was usually manning an anti-aircraft gun. And when I was listening to these stories for the first time, when I was about 10 years old, of course, that was something I was very fascinated with. And I started building models of different planes and things and learning. I would get out the World Book Encyclopedia and read about the German planes in World War II and so on. One of the most haunting stories, though, that he told me was he used to say how, and I think this kind of haunted him too, during some of the rough storms and waves in the North Atlantic, when he was on these ships, and a lot of these ships were not really so big. We tend to think of, I think people who have not been in the Navy, like me, for example, when we think of a U.S. Navy ship, we think of like a big aircraft carrier like the Enterprise. A lot of these ships were not so big. And he would talk about how they would go up on, the top of the waves and then they'd come down in the valleys. Well, sometimes men would get swept overboard, if they were not careful. And there was no way to go back for them. They were just lost at sea at that point. And I remember thinking about that and, how, what they must have been thinking, it must have been a horrible way to go. Um, but I, um, I feel tremendously grateful, and a sense of reverence as well, at having heard about World War II secondhand, and having, or firsthand, and being able to hear about these things from somebody who actually experienced them, particularly somebody who was so close to me. And I wonder if today kids are getting the same kind of stories from their grandparents. I don't know. But anyway, what if you're maybe, were born in the 60s or the 70s and you have World War II generation grandparents? What stories did you hear from them? Or maybe if you're a little bit older, what did you hear from your parents? And happy Veterans Day to all of you, and thanks to those who served. And I will talk to you again soon. Good night.